We've been talking about the evolution of the skull, and what I'd like to do now is just sort of recap some of what we've already covered, and then draw your attention to a couple of key points that I think are most important. So let's just take a very brief overview. We've already talked about a little bit of this, the fact that there is this progressive assimilation of cranial components. We're not going to talk about chondral elements, nor are we going to talk about Williston's law, which is really not a law at all. It's an observation that Williston made, and it was true at the time, but who knows whether it holds true in the future. It's sort of silly to refer to it as a law. But there are a couple of other key points that we need to think about. And those are the evolution of sound conduction routes, and we're going to talk at some length about that because that's directly related to the next point, which is evolution of the mandibular suspensorium. That's sort of a big deal, and if you understand the evolution of the mandibular suspensorium, then you'll understand a great deal about the evolution of vertebrates. The other thing that I want to do, see if I can get this to advance here. The other thing that I want to talk about is the dissociation of the skull and the pectoral girdle. So the pectoral girdle becomes unhooked from the skull. There's also a reduction of the interorbital space. There's some compounding of bone. I don't care too much about that at this point. But also there's this division of the occipital condyles. That's sort of a big deal because it has a lot to do with what's going on in terms of lifestyles, feeding, and predatory capabilities and things of that sort. And then also formation of the temporal fossa, which we've already talked about a little bit. And then formation of the secondary palate, which we've also talked about just a little bit. So that's where we're headed with this. I'm going to break it up into a couple of smaller videos just to make your viewing life a little bit easier. So there it is. All right, so just as a review, let's remember what the basic layout is. The skull is comprised of three units. There's the splanchno-cranium, the dermocranium, and then the neurocranium. The neurocranium is this box that holds up the skull. The dermocranium forms the lid of the box and protects the brain. So the neurocranium holds the brain. The dermocranium is the lid of the box protecting the top of the brain. And then the splanchno-cranium are these bars. They start off as being cartilage. And we'll talk a little bit more about those momentarily. But the splanchno-cranium also extends farther back as well. But here, it actually forms the jaw. The upper one is the palatoquadrate cartilage, and the lower one is Meckel's cartilage. So these two components are crucial, especially when we start talking about conduction as sound. The splanchno-cranium is then obviously overlaid by dermocranium. So when you look at a skull, you don't actually see the cartilage. The cartilage is buried deep down inside. And if you pick up the dentary bone of your cat, you'll notice that there's this opening on the medial side of the dentary bone. You can actually see that opening, and then it's exposed on the outside as well. So that is where Meckel's cartilage lies, and obviously there's a similar structure attached to the upper jaw. We already talked about the fact that that the skull is actually formed around the notochord, right? So we have these paracortal bars on either side of the notochord. And then we have these sensory capsules. Remember our discussion of those sensory capsules and why they have the sequence that they do. It is important that the otic capsules are in the back, and we'll talk more about that when we talk about the jaw suspension.